Hello, I'm Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats. Welcome to episode 20 something of Powerhouse Perspectives. With us today is Amélie Koran, who has been around the world in a lot of things, and we can talk about past and roles and so on and so forth. But really, as we're talking about before we started here, what we're trying to discuss is looking back from where you've been, that unique perspective that you have had, to get where you are in your career to this point. Has honesty, transparency, all these things we talk about in information sharing, in sharing threat intelligence, inventory information, S-bombs, and so forth. How's that really played out? Working at Disney and in the government, and the amazing roles you had, and then into the present. Where are we right now, and kind of where we go. So, first, thanks. Where in the world are you today?
I'm outside Washington, D.C. again after about a year on the West Coast, and realizing that the rain and dreariness that was the Pacific Northwest was not our bag. So we've moved back to our core center here outside the halls of power in D.C. But luckily, I'm not in government anymore, so I have a little bit more freedom at certain points to be able to kind of swing the bat occasionally. So.
Swinging the bat, and you're involved in the Atlantic Council these days, which is a interesting crux for all this as well.
Yeah.
We did a similar thing actually. We moved out to the Pacific Northwest in California once upon a time, and realized we're East Coast people. Florida and Ontario more, but time zones matter too.
Yeah. Well, I've lived on the West Coast 3 times in my life. And I think third time was definitely another charm. So we've made the decision that we're definitely more east of the Mississippi. My spouse is from Wisconsin. So, and I've lived pretty much a good chunk of my time on the East Coast, and got a chance to kind of, work in different areas and different industries and whatnot. So that's been the benefit. But the weather is definitely not my forte out there.
So yeah, let's get into the topic here. So as we see the first question, scrolling along down there, so when we look at frankness, honesty, clarity, and you're, I don't think we can say this too much to each other. I mean, I know so many people like you that have these amazing careers, and you know how much a Disney file I am. Like, just having that role inside, they just don't give me started, right? Where they.
Well, I tried to connect you. I tried to connect you with the CISO there, and they didn't want to have anything to do with the ISAC. So I was like, all right, it's your own funeral. So
that's a fascinating thing. I did actually interview for a role there, and got to have those inside talks, with future, and just validate much to our point right now. Like, where are you right now? Where have you been? Looking out at the next couple generations of ride systems, what do those look like? And being who I am, what does that mean for cybersecurity and so forth, right? If you're going to be Disney and have Disney World with those sort of 5th generation rides that are coming out, in 10 years, you have to have certain things in place that don't really exist today, and drive us down paths, right? So, but I've always liked this, the honesty and transparency thing, because it gets outside of cyber and security. Talk to business people about this. Like, you have business relationships. How much does does transparency, like saying, I'm Disney. I know you're not speaking. We're just conjecturing. You're not speaking for them anymore, anyways. But if I'm Disney, I'm going to create a business relationship with somebody else, and there's going to be technology involved. The Disney animation creative process, is amazing. And I'm probably 10 years out of date with that these days, but it's amazing how fractal that is. There are animators and creators doing work around the world, all connected through this, as I understand it, really well architected network that allows them to create that massive intellectual property that is Disney, our Disney movies and so forth. And so you can't do that without openness and honesty in the contract language, and the way you're handling partners and artists and so forth, all the way down to every leaf in the tree. So it seems to me, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not just kind of the private sector. Just being able to call it the private sector shows been government long enough. So it's the public and private sector, and I think those similar kind of concerns, are exacerbated in both environments. I think the pandemic has been an interesting challenge for the public sector, because they're obviously one of the ones that everyone kind of refers to as being kind of old school and having to be in the office, and collaboration takes place face to face and the like, whereas the perception that the private sector is, much more, akin to being able to work in a distributed environment. But when it kind of came down to it, the last couple of roles, I had in the federal government, I had people who were dispersed around the country, and making sure that they had the right amount of information to do their jobs, make decisions, and so forth was paramount to enable that. And obviously, since we're wearing the hat of security, it's how can you do it securely as well. There's definitely different levels. On the private sector, I've had a couple jobs there. They sometimes, when I make posts or jokes about some of the stuff, that the amount of code names and levels of distrust among different business units is much more paranoid in the private sector than it is in the federal government, even though the federal government makes you basically lay out where you were the last 10 years, who you had a drink with, and so forth. So it's been kind of relatively interesting trying to josh information sharing and distribution within those two types of environments.
Well, that actually does take us really well, I think, into the current state question, right? We were talking about it in email and so forth before this, right? Have we achieved peak grand illusion? And I look at this from from my own odd context, but this show has really helped me think of it. For each of the folks I've talked to, these fascinating people, each of us from our own contexts, come at this, and we're addressing something that kind of everyone on Earth is familiar with, but it's very emergent, right? What do you do with way too much data? And on every level, just cybersecurity, right? The ISAC and the information sharing space, 10 years ago, we're talking about, situational awareness, mapping all the stuff, the Beltway, Mark Weatherford and others have been on these shows. I was hunting around the Beltway, 10 years ago, trying to explain how, from my perspective, where a situational awareness goes. And it is a little daunting because it means there needs to be, thousands of ISACs, not 6, that there needs to be monitoring on every OT network everywhere, every communication link everything needs to be SIMmed and connected and so on and so forth. And it's merging now with the public world, our disinformation, our cognitive security problems as a global population. There's so much information. You can find enough evidence of anything, literally anything, but you can't really find the truth. And on this entire spectrum, folks like you and I, because of our careers, have to meld all of that. I can get you the cybersecurity information, the S-bombs or the vulnerability alerts or whatever these specific quantums are, but I also have to put it in an operational environment that's embedded in vastly more information that is sociologically problematic now. So what are your thoughts, the feelings every?
Well, to tie basically that last question about the frankness to this one and kind of the challenges is the time that I was on a rotation at Office Management Budget, which is part of the White House, the folks that actually kind of do more of the deeper think stuff. Part of what I got to review was the CISA legislation. Actually, it should just be called CISA because it wasn't the one that established the agency, but it was about the information sharing. And that, along with a lot of other legislation that kind of came down, didn't necessarily reflect the reality of the environment, the business environments that were out there, the information sharing environments. And I unfortunately ended up getting kind of no one's stigmatized, but more or less I was very open and very frank in the comments as to, it's great that you want to do this, but this isn't how it works. Or if you do it this way, you're going to break certain trust models. There's a whole chain of things that can happen. In fact, actually, when that 2014 information sharing law became, moved to the next Congress and was enacted in 2015, the trust hole, as I called it, was still there. It was a chain of, if information got shared, which was protecting the anonymity and sources of where it came from, and when it passed, eventually out to industry, if used in the certain case, could end up resulting in disclosure because of a potential lawsuit that would arise from, say, a loss of income from a company, and shareholders would do that. So when you make these actions, regulations and whatnot, you've got to do that fourth dimensional chess to kind of like think about how this would be weaponized, how data would be weaponized. And then thinking about this peak grand illusion, having just before my current employer, to not be named, but a large entertainment company that's not Disney, they Splunk deals with data. Everyone knows them as a security SIM company, but they've gotten into application performance management, observability, and whatnot. But the term that my boss basically kind of, I wouldn't say coined, but definitely used a lot, was digital exhaust. All the instrumentation that we do, all the data logging and so forth is useless unless it's dealt with in a useful fashion. I've given a talk on proper instrumentation. My dad was a water quality chemist. He's now retired, but one of the things he was dealing with was how do you sample for, say, pollution in a river? Do you sample above the power plant, and then do you sample below it to see the differentials between that? Do you sample near the side of the stream versus the middle of the stream, because the turbulence and speed of some of the stuff through those waterways changes the dispersion and stuff like that? And that's very important when you translate that over into the digital side of, are you looking at the right things in the right ways? Can you do it at wire speed? Are you losing, big thing about Splunk was full fidelity. It just took in everything. But then you have this huge pile of data that you now have to sort through. You're going to use filters. Are you using the right filters? Are you asking the right questions? One of the things that always irked me about in my career was having executives that asked for dashboards, and they'd ask for these dashboards, and they're like getting down as much to the traffic light, red, green, and yellow, let me know that it's just alive, versus, well, what's the question you're asking of the data? My background originally was computer engineering, but I switched into decision science. And for me, I look at data and questions and say, what here is helping me support a decision? So when you talk about like SBOMs, that's a technical solution and not a decision support solution. While it can tell you what makes up the environment and the provenance of the stuff that is in a software package, it doesn't necessarily rate it, and I don't think its intent is to rate the risk of using those types of systems, and that requires yet another abstraction layer. So, as we joked about in the green room beforehand here, we have all the stuff that we've done before. We have these formats, we have these interchanges and so forth that essentially exchange the same information, but none of them actually help somebody who has to write the check, make the call. If who tells the sniper to pull the trigger? Nothing is actually supporting that field general's mentality of like, do we go in for the kill, or do we wait? And this is one of those cases of, will I kind of keep an open source software package limping along in a vulnerable format because my operations don't support patching it? If I have that vulnerable solution in a different configuration in the environment, does that mitigate the vulnerability to a point where it allows me to run it until I have an operational window to fix it? And I don't see a lot of that either coming from industry as to help, extend and help people adopt the use of things like SBOMs and some of these other data interchange formats. But it's also, I don't think industry, as they develop tools, are really thinking about this as the decision support thing. They just think about it as solving a technical problem. Hate to say this, they're the ambulance chasers. The next vulnerability that's out, you're going to get a call. Hey, we can go and fix this, or we can provide detection, but it doesn't actually help you solve the problem. And I think that's our biggest issue right now, is we have all of this data, much like we would be for doctors. And what are we doing to actually solve the core problem? What are we doing to cure cancer, rather than just provide, chemotherapy? Chemotherapy doesn't cure cancer. It's taking care of cancer, mitigating the effects and stuff. And I think that's the big difference we have to address right now.
Okay, so there's two things that on my mind that we're talking about here. One is, you're talking earlier about sort of structurally that that's nice to understand, but that's not how things work, right? And the other one, the volume of data, right? And I think the SBOMs, for me, we're an interesting process with that, because it's become fairly cliche for the in crowd, to understand that where we are right now is saying, I'm a vendor, I would like to scribe an SBOM on Platinum and give it to a customer. And where we need to be going is thinking of, wait, how many different pieces of code are there? And no, you can't even have an SBOM for every piece of code. That's not the way it works. There's entirely too much code now, much less microservices based on things that were compiled during your, during this explanation, and exist for that moment, these ephemeral pieces of code, yada, yada, yada. Right. And if we're going down a path, much to the point of, the middle question, or the peak grand illusion in the cognitive security space, we're sort of there. There's so much information, in social media and everything else, that it, flooding the field with nonsense works, right? And works strategically. And in cybersecurity, less so, right? Threat intelligence and SBOMs and so forth, we're still talking small volumes, right? Relatively small pieces, volumes in the grand total of things. But if you look forward, and this is where, to our last question, I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There may also be trains along the way. But I think ultimately, once we realize that's not how any of this works, that we're not going to forever, for another 10 years, another 10 years, and 100 years, and 1,000 years, be saying, Amelie, you're representing company ABC right now. I'm company, and we're going to have a human conversation and share an individual piece of information. No. We need to think about how we design structures, which I think play into the strengths that you've been, are the core of your whole career, that accept the reality, that there is not too much information now. There is 1/10 billionth of the amount of information we need to deal with at a point in the future. And you can see it from here. So what are we going to do without being able to stay up long enough, drink enough coffee, and look at every line of code and look at every log message? What are we going to do in the real world with these cyber systems that need to be, reliable enough to run countries and infrastructures on?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think generally, the only thing I can tout of myself is I'm not an expert at anything, but I have a breadth of experience that can at least relate commonalities between different industries and different use cases or instances of an event occurring at a time. I often joke I've been at the wrong place at the right time to be able to kind of have the empathy of what happens, what could happen, what should happen. The should happen is more or less predictive, which, if we could always tell you what should happen and it comes to fruition, I need to buy more lottery tickets. But, I still think for a significant time now and in the future, we're going to be playing catch up. It's not necessarily that we don't have the technology to solve or help address or solve some of the problems we have. It's the willingness to kind of do the basics, do the boring stuff. Asset inventory, not sexy, tough when you ask partners and vendors to say, hey, it's great you're promoting this tool to do X, Y, and Z, but can you just give me a basic inventory from a scan and tell me what's on there with some level of clarity and trustability? And it's often, sort of, kind of, but it's not our primary feature. Starting from those blocks, to know what you have to protect, to know what you have to operate, know where data is coming from and going to. I can't. I've moved so often in my life, I can barely tell you what's in all my moving boxes. Some are in the house and some are in the storage unit. I mean, that's a similar situation here. Is that in most organizations there is a system that has been quietly churning along, doing its thing for forever, and suddenly, when they're remodeling an office, there's a single cable going into a plastered off closet where that server has been sitting for a while, and someone decides, well, we're going to move, they cut it or whatever and move on, and suddenly, a bunch of operations go down. You need to have this situational awareness for that. So, until we get to that, I think that is your train at the other end of the tunnel is like, we're not doing the basics well enough. I run counter to a lot of people online who are like, well, you can only tell people to patch your shit, only so many times before, you feel like you're just spinning into the wind or crying wolf or whatever. But that's some of the stuff that kind of gets you ahead of the game. Starting and running a couple of vulnerability management programs in some organizations I've been in. The toughest thing is, going back to the previous question here about the awash in data is part of what security professionals need to do is to kind of emphasize what's important. Not everything is security people tend to always have the little, Radio Shack hard hat with the little siren and light on top. Everything's important. Look at me. But sometimes you need to kind of help your peers and business leaders prioritize what are the things they need to be focusing on and show the value of having those been addressed what's the next step and what's the value back to the business. Not everything, no one's going to care about the OWASP or the SANS top 20 or any of those things unless you show the fact that, hey, we have a program in place. We've gone through the sanitization of all this stuff to address these issues, the basic issues. And the next time a major vulnerability comes around, we manage to not have that as an issue because we've done the basic block and tackling. And when you get business to understand that modicum of effort required to get to those points pays off in dividends, so that when a big issue comes by, or you're looking for resources to address some of the nits that you've had on your to-do list for a while, it's much easier to go and say, hey, I need these resources to address this, because then you can point back to that saved value from doing some of that basic stuff and say, hey, this is just going to increase that value. And that's, I think, the most important thing about trying to transition from explaining the technical benefits of something to somebody to where you have to bridge that to a business and operational standpoint. And I think that's our biggest challenge within the security community, is there's not a lot of good business translators out there. We are very good we talk forensics, we talk reverse engineering, we can do blue team, red team, compliance people, but very rarely do you have that kind of holistic view to say, hey, with all of these things together, we should feel relatively comfortable about where we stand. To overuse the Nather and Wendy Nather and Andy's security poverty line thing, I've coined it as the water line, is most people just want to get to where they can kind of tread water. But to get yourself into a boat like you have in the back there, making sure that you're going to stay afloat if something comes by, I think that's the next step for a lot of the stuff, is to have enough things in place so that you can take a hit, you can take rough water and still, be to survive, to be reliable and keep operations going. And I think that's the next step I think people should be shooting for. It's a belief just from experience, but different companies and different organizations and whatnot are different states. Small companies are going to have a harder time, I think, in certain cases than larger ones, but larger companies have the structure of being large, that you're trying to steer an aircraft carrier or an oil container versus a small speedboat or a tugboat. You're going to have those types of reactions that you're going to have to account for.
And I was doing so good there because I was thinking of a way to mutilate my metaphor, about the lights in the tunnel and trains. I think what you're saying, but now you got me thinking of boats, right? So now I can't decide which one to use. But in the train analogy, I guess in the tunnel there's side passages, right? What you're saying is you can be the train that misses the other train, because I think there's trains coming at us. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Not everyone's going to make it. But we have enough pieces right now to be able to look forward, right, and actually be able to say, all right, we need to switch tracks, do these things.
It's the cybersecurity trolley problem. Yeah, it's a cybersecurity trolley problem. Do you blow up the trolley, or do you pick the path that's going to cause the least amount of problems? Because you're still going to have your operational impact. If you decide to patch something and it's super critical and patching is going to affect your operations, pick the one that's going to cause the least amount of pain or grief, or, I hate to say it, like moral reduction of moral fortitude. There you go. Hope that's going to, benefit you in the long run, versus just like full steam ahead, let's go, and, have a kill count of 61. So.
Yep. All right. Well, this was fantastic as always. Amélie, I could talk with you, hang out. We need to get back to Disney again and eat food. And now that you're not a Fed, you're going to have to debate about paying for part of the appetizers and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
But thanks for your time today. Everything you've done for the industry and so forth, making the world a better place to be.
Yeah, still will try to now and in the future. I think that's the key thing. I think the phrase is that we don't pick a career here. We kind of pick a passion or an ideal that we want to do. And I think that's for a lot of security people. We want to continue down this path because we believe in what we do, rather than just want to have it as a something that derives a check that we can pay for housing and food and all the other stuff, which is good, mind you. But we pick it because it's a passion. So.
Exactly. All right. So thank you. Thanks everyone for listening and helping us all make the world a better place. Cheers.
Cool. Cheers.